Hello, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar on the graduate school application process. My name is Jenica Heim, and I'm the Education USA advisor here in Canada, based out of Ottawa. What we do here at Education USA, we support students interested in studying in the United States with free advising services, which are comprehensive and unbiased. I personally work with students in Canada to apply to U.S. universities. If you are not based out of Canada, you can you can look up your closest center at educationusa.state.gov, which I'm putting in the chat right now. And you can speak to someone just like me in your home country. Today, we are fortunate to be joined by Megan Begert, who is the International Graduate Admissions and Recruitment Advisor at Binghamton University, which is part of the State University of New York system. She is an expert in this field, and she's very excited to talk to you all today about successfully completing your application. So let's all greet Megan, and Megan, go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you, Jenica. And I agree, I am very excited to be presenting today. I really enjoy working with Education USA in different offices all over the world. I actually just recently came back from Ghana and Nigeria, where I was working very closely with Education USA as well. And so, as Jenica mentioned, this is my area of specialization. I work for the graduate school at Binghamton University, and I represent about 60 different master's programs and 30 different PhD programs. And I am considered a recruiter and an admissions advisor. So today we're going to talk about the basics of the U.S. application process. So we'll go through the whole process from start to finish. And really, even before the application process, we'll think about how you might make decisions related to studying in the U.S. So first of all, we all choose higher education for a number of different reasons. And depending on those goals and depending on your specific life circumstances, you will, between the 4,000 and more than 4,000 universities in the United States, you have your pick. And so you really can find a perfect match for you in the US. There are many different types of universities, anywhere from very small universities with 500 or fewer students, all the way up to very large state universities with up to 50,000 students. So that's one consideration, would be the size of the university. Also, you may be considering master's programs, educational programs, or doctorate programs, which would be found within a graduate school. But beyond that, there are professional programs, including medical, law, and pharmacy. You may also consider public or private universities. The public universities are funded by the U.S., typically the state tax base for that university. And private institutions are based on endowments. Some universities in the United States are more focused on research than others, and so you'll see here that research universities focus on developing research in specific fields. And as I mentioned, you have some choices in terms of the size of the university. So just as an example, I'll tell you a little bit about Binghamton University. I've been here working for about a year now, and I'm actually a graduate of a master's program here too. Binghamton University is considered to be medium-sized. We're about 17,000 students. That's about 14,000 students in undergraduate and more than 3,000 in graduate programs. We are a public state university. We're a member of the State University of New York system. And we are considered a research university. In the State University of New York system, we have 4 top research universities, and Binghamton is one of those. So one important consideration for all of us when considering graduate school, of course, is the costs and funding for graduate programs. So there are a variety of different ways that you can study in the US and fund your studies in the US. Typically at the master's level, you will find assistantships, and there are a couple different types of assistantships that you will find in the US. There are some research assistantships where you are working directly with the faculty in your department. And typically those research assistantship positions and graduate assistant positions within the department, those funding decisions are made along with your offer of admission. And so when you receive an offer letter from a university, you'll also receive a funding letter. And that's not true with all universities. At times these processes can be separate. So you may be offered admission, but you won't know about funding for several months more. And there are often external graduate assistantships. That's what I mean here by the graduate or office assistantship. I'm here with a graduate assistant. Her name is Lisa, and she was hired by the graduate school to do work related to recruitment and enrollment. And so those are positions that are left open for graduate students to work while they're studying. At the doctoral level, there are fellowship funded positions as well as assistantships that could be research assistantships. They may also be teaching assistantships. And typically in the US, you're more likely to receive funding at the PhD level than you are at the master's level. There are some external funding opportunities as well. There is Fulbright. You may consider your national government. They may have scholarships for studying outside of your country as well. And there are sometimes private corporations that will provide funding for students to develop their skills in a certain field. And in the 21st century, you'll find that most applications are going to be all online. And so any materials that you'll be submitting will be scanned and submitted directly to an application, typically within a variety of application portals. I imagine that when you're applying to several different universities, you'll have to be learning several different application systems. But today they seem to be pretty accessible. So these are some standard requirements. What I'm going to list is actually the requirements in general for master's and PhD programs at Binghamton University. I should note that we do not have a medical school, and so the examples that I give won't be specific to medical schools. We also don't have a law program, and so these examples won't apply to law either. Some of the materials that you'll need to submit are your transcript. For most programs, you'll need to submit the GRE. If you're intending to apply to a management program or an accounting program, you could possibly submit the GMAT for the GRE instead of the GRE. You will also submit a personal statement, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, a resume or CV, and letters of recommendation. For our programs, we ask that you submit sometimes 2 and sometimes 3 letters of recommendation. And so what I like to talk about is the art and the science of the graduate school application. So starting with the science side there on the right, these are kind of the things, by the time you're doing the application process, these items are predetermined. You have your transcripts from your university. You've already taken these scores and your tests, these tests and your scores are already decided. So the place where you have some creativity is on these other items, including the personal statement, the resume, and letters of recommendation. And so for this, what is art? What is art about? Art's about connection, it's about creativity, and it's about relationship. And so I encourage you, when you are writing your personal statement, you're thinking about your resume and you're thinking about your letters of recommendation. Think about how you can build connections with the university to which you're applying, and think about how you can do so creatively and really express yourself during the application process. So the personal statement, you're going to build a connection between yourself and the university. You'll mention how your research interests align with that of the university. You'll tell a little bit about what inspires you, what makes you passionate about the work that you do. You can use a little bit of emotional language in this personal statement. It's not meant to be a dry research-oriented paper. So have a little fun with it, I encourage you. You will, the resume and CV, that's also your opportunity to explain what your background has contributed to what makes you special. What are you bringing to this university that you can contribute? And so with the specifics of transcripts, there are certain items that you do want to make sure that are showing on your transcript. Most schools will need to see your final grade point average as well as your marks for each individual class. It should show your degree type, when you've graduated from that degree. And typically you'll submit an unofficial transcript via the application, and then when you arrive on campus, you can bring the official paper copy of your transcript with you. As for test scores, as I mentioned, there are a number of aptitude tests that you will have to take for the graduate application. And each university will have a different average acceptance score, or what might be a minimum acceptance score for each of those exams. And so while you're looking around at different universities, definitely check to see how your scores align with the scores at the university to which you're applying. However, most universities these days are not only looking at your scores, they're interested in you as a whole person. And so they'll consider your scores, but they'll also consider what other experiences you bring to the table. In terms of your resume or CV, one thing I like to mention, we often are advised that a resume or CV should only be one page. I encourage you not to necessarily stick to that rule. By this time, we're all adults and we do have experience behind us. And so if you feel something is significant, please do include that on your resume and don't worry so much about the space limit. These are some of the items that you'll want to be sure to include on your resume or CV. And when we're thinking about the international context, there are certain formats for resumes that vary in different contexts. And so in the United States, there are some things that you wouldn't typically include on a resume. So please, if you're submitting a resume in the US, you don't need to include your age, your gender, religion. You also don't need to have a photo, and you don't need to include your marital status. As international students, there are a couple of different items that you'll need to submit. The first two items, the ISFS, this form may be called something different by different universities. But essentially what this form is, it's showing that you have the ability, you have the ability to pay for your studies and support yourself for 1 year in the United States. And your proof of financial support is the documents that back that up. And so you'll sign off on this form, say you're getting $20,000 from an uncle and you have $20,000 in your statement, or excuse me, in your savings. And so on your proof of financial support, you would submit your bank statement that shows that $20,000. And you would include some sort of statement showing your uncle's savings as well. And in the United States, most programs will expect that you will take an English language proficiency exam, depending on which country you studied and earned your bachelor's degree in. And so look to see the requirements for each university. The country requirements tend to change and be different from university to university. And so, as I mentioned, I am a recruiter and an admissions advisor. I'm happy to talk with you about different opportunities at our university. And if we happen not to be a good match, I'm happy to either refer you back to Education USA or to help you find a different university that might meet your needs better. And I'm also happy to take some questions while we're here.
Thank you, Megan, for your presentation. And I'm sure you guys have questions. I mean, she gave an overview of the process. I'm sure you have some questions about some of the, maybe some details about the process that you, as you're getting started. We're here in October. If you're planning to apply for next year, I'm sure you've already started your um, uh, you've already been researching universities you're interested in and probably have some deeper questions. So please feel free to ask. We would be happy to help you with those questions. There we go. We've got one.
And so the question is, do internal work or research positions have as much standing as professional positions that are not set aside by the university? I'm not quite sure that I understand the question.
Yeah, what do you mean by standing, Mackenzie? Do you mean like on your resume? Do they look as good to employers, or do you mean something else?
Okay, and so what I would say about that is that by the time you're in graduate school, you should have a good sense of your career path and your career interests. And so you can take that opportunity to find work that is related to your area of interest in a career. And so I would advise you to try to ensure that those positions will provide professional experience that is applicable after you graduate. I think that's what would improve standing on your resume.
Yeah, and a good example would be if you're doing a master's program and you're considering doing a PhD, then trying to get a teaching assistantship or some opportunity to work to teach a course or to assist teaching a course is usually either that or as a research assistant if you're in the sciences. These are the kind of positions you might want to try to focus on, whereas if you're looking more to get out into industry, then maybe having or right into the workforce, maybe having a position like Megan said, her graduate assistant Lisa is doing more of an office type position, more administrative work. And if that's appealing to you and that has to do with your future goals, then that might make more sense. So just to provide an example to illuminate what Megan said. You're welcome. What other questions do you guys have? We recently did a webinar on choosing your essay topic, and we specifically were speaking about the undergraduate admissions essay. However, a lot that was covered in that particular webinar would be applicable to writing your essay for graduate studies as well. The big difference is for graduate studies, you should be much more specific about your future goals and intentions than you need to be when you're applying for undergraduate. They expect you to be more of like, the world is my oyster in undergraduate, whereas graduate, you need to have a more specific plan. But if you can check that out on our YouTube channel, you can see here on this last slide where the YouTube channel is, so you can see that topic. The next webinar we're hosting is Securing Grad School Funding, and you can register for that right here on the slide as well. But if you have any questions about those things right now, you can definitely ask them.
And also, I'll just add that most universities do have someone like me who works in the admissions office that can provide advice and guidance throughout the application process. So I encourage you to seek those people out. And you always do have Education USA as a resource as well if you get stuck during the process. I see a question. The TOEFL will always be the first thing you'll see in evaluation for admission. TOEFL is one of those things where there is a hard minimum. So for the English language proficiency, what we ask for the IBT TOEFL is that students have a minimum of an 80. And for us, that is typically a hard minimum. So even if you had a 79, you're somewhat unlikely to be offered admission. I won't say that that's true across the board, but that is the case for our university. And so in that sense, it can be, it's not the first thing that they consider, but it is definitely an important consideration. Equally important would be other test scores and what you're really trying to prove is your suitability for higher level studies. And so your GPA and your coursework as an undergraduate will also contribute to your application and the consideration there.
And just a side note for Canada, you would only need to take the TOEFL if you have gone through school in a non-English speaking school. So for Francophones, even if you are fluent in English, if all your schooling has been done in French, many schools will want you to submit a TOEFL score, although you can talk with the admissions officer to see if they're willing to take a GRE score or some other evaluation instead of that. So just be aware that you need to start that conversation if you think that you shouldn't have to take the TOEFL for some reason.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about that, if you're kind of coming into an application system as an international student, you may be flagged that you need to submit the TOEFL score. And so as a student applying from Canada, if you were entering our application system, there would be a checkbox, a requirement to submit those scores. And so you will actually have to communicate with me or with someone like me to ask them to waive that requirement.
It's good to know. And like Megan was saying, that schools have different application systems. So that's going to be a case-by-case basis as you start filling out your applications. Mm-hmm. Thank you for your question, Hector. So far, 2 really great questions. Any others, please keep them coming.
If you get a TOEFL score below the minimum, will you automatically be rejected? I would say no, not in most universities. You won't automatically be rejected. Would you agree, Jenica?
I think what you said earlier was probably correct, that you would have a highly unlikely chance of being admitted. Your application would still be reviewed, but you would just be very unlikely to receive admissions. The reasons universities have these requirements is because they really want students to be successful. And they've created these floors to say, you know, if you're unable to reach this standard, we don't feel like you are going to have the English skills needed to do well in our university. And so you can always Megan, maybe you can talk about, do you have an intensive English program that students can enroll in prior
So
to?
we at our Binghamton campus, we actually do not have an intensive English program. If you have already been admitted to our graduate programs, we do have some ESL courses that are available to support your studies, but we don't have any standalone English programs here. We actually partner with the University of California, Irvine, and so we will refer students who need more intensive English language study to UC Irvine.
Okay, great. Yeah, so
And
that's
and
mhm.
I would agree that if you're scoring below the minimum, it's going to be a very stressful time for you in really trying to catch up on your English while you're trying to absorb a lot of coursework. Having been a student in a graduate program that had many international students, honestly, it was really hard to see some of those students with lower scores coming in and really struggling. I think they lost a full semester, honestly, because they were just learning English and learning. It's not just that you're learning English, you're learning academic English specific to a field. And so that may be very different than English you've learned or studied in before. It's also that our faculty members, they have an American accent and they are speaking very quickly about technical things. And so you find that some students who aren't quite prepared, they can't quite understand what the professors are saying. And so they end up losing a lot of time spent in the classroom where they're not quite picking up on all of the materials. So I do encourage you, if you are in need of a higher TOEFL score, to take the time to really get some extra study in. It's definitely within your best interest.
Hmm. And then Hector had another just one last TOEFL question for you.
If you have a previous TOEFL, I believe that the TOEFL lasts for 2 years. Yeah, so we can accept a score within the past 2 years. And so if you haven't taken it within that time, you will need to take it again. Sometimes we'll take a look at that unofficial score. If you send us the old scores, we'll take a look at it to kind of see where we think you might fit in. And so you could share that with an admissions advisor, but you would need to submit new official scores.
Right. And then we have a new question. Should I complete my GRE before contacting professors, or will most professors only care about your resume and grade reports, specifically speaking about a master's supervisor?
Sure. I would say do complete your GRE for a couple reasons. I mean, it's not just that the score is most important. While they will consider it, it's also that if you have not yet completed your GRE exam, you're kind of early in the process of application. And so if you haven't done everything you need to do to prepare to submit applications, then you're not ready to speak with a faculty member. You could do some information gathering from the website and maybe ask about specific areas of research, something specific like that. But I would say that make sure you have pretty much everything in line. You know what you need to study, you know kind of where you would fit into the admission requirements for the university that you're interested in.
And to Jean-Francois, I think most professors, while they want you to have while you need to have all the boxes checked of everything, they don't necessarily care about your GRE scores as much as your resume or your grades. I mean, those things are most important to a professor. But like Megan said, they also want to see that you've completed everything you need to complete to be accepted to the university and have met all those standards. So they might ask, but it's the most important thing a professor would consider as far as taking you on. Professors take on a student who has similar interests, research interests to them, and can contribute to their laboratory or to their own research in some way.
Mm-hmm. And I would say, just thinking about how graduate students contribute to research, that's something that is significantly different than at the undergraduate level. As an undergraduate, you're more of a consumer or a customer there to learn. But in the graduate study level, and especially at the PhD level, you are there to work with the university. While you're there to learn and you will have classwork, it's also important that you are ready to be a professional engaged in research as well.
Great, we're getting more questions. How far in advance should one complete the GRE before the application deadline? For example, if the application deadline is the first week of January, is it too late to write the exam in December?
Do you probably have an application timeline in mind that you recommend at Education USA? That seems to me to be a little late to be submitting scores. If you consider that, you know, those scores take about 7 to 10 days to get into our system sometimes. So you're really kind of pushing that deadline if there were to be an issue.
You should just look at the specific website to see how late they'll accept scores because, you know, the thing about standardized testing scores is they're not sent from you. Like when you submit an application, all the pieces, quite a few of the application pieces come from you. The ones that don't, though, are your transcripts, your letters of recommendation, or your standardized testing scores. So oftentimes there might be something online to demonstrate when those need to be received by. If there isn't anything, then you should just make sure they are received by the deadline. I think it is best to try to get those things done as early as possible, but if right now that's the deadline you're working with, a January deadline, and the earliest you can get in is December, then you can always shoot a note over to admissions and let them know your testing date in case there's some sort of delay over the holidays for them receiving your scores.
And that actually reminds me of different types of descriptions of deadlines that you might find on different types from different departments or for different programs. There may be just one application deadline, and that's for entry in fall of the following year. There may be a second application deadline that is for spring. Most students tend to start in the fall. There also tend to be more funding opportunities for students in the fall. But you may also see the term rolling for admissions for the deadline. And what rolling means is that the faculty are reviewing those applications anytime from, that the day after classes of the previous year and up to the day before classes of the following year. They're reviewing it at different times throughout the year. So in one sense, that leaves an open window for you to submit your application. Maybe if you didn't get your first couple choices, it gives you an option for submitting another application to a different university as well. One other consideration is that there is often an application deadline and a funding deadline. And so you should always apply, of course, before the funding deadline if you'd like to be considered for assistantships or fellowships.
And another thing that is super important to realize is that you are applying to the graduate school at the university, but you are also applying to the department that you want to be in. So usually those deadlines will align, but you really need to make sure that you are applying for the graduate school deadline and everything is in order for them. And if the department deadlines slightly is different, then it doesn't matter as much as you have to get everything in by the graduate school deadline. If there's other pieces that they're allowing you at the department level to get in a little bit later, then that's okay to adhere to that deadline. So there's a lot to juggle when applying to graduate school, because also the funding that Megan's talking about can come at different levels too. It can come from the graduate school and the university, or it could come directly from the department through their, various assistantships or fellowships. You're very welcome, Eva. You guys are asking fabulous questions. We just give you a little time and push you a little bit
And
to
you're
get the good questions.
reminding me of things that I missed or maybe should have mentioned sooner. So yeah, keep them coming.
I have a question, Megan. What do you think when a student does contact a professor? What do you think a good timing is to do that, and what should they say in an email?
Okay. Um, So the trick is that, faculty are always an interesting bunch. And so you'll find some that are very responsive and very receptive to your emails, but you'll also find some that you just may never hear from. They're very research focused and they're not focused on the enrollment process. And so should you not hear back from a faculty member, you can always try another faculty member, or you might check in with the admissions office to see if they have some advice or could help make some connections for you. So a good time to reach out to our faculty, I would say that I'd say your odds of getting a response are best when you have either completed your application or submitted a significant part of the application. Because with these centralized systems, when you send an email, they can actually look at your record and see kind of where you might fit in and your competitiveness for the program. And so I would say, too early in the process, you are less likely to hear from that person. And that conversation, if you're asking kind of 9 months before the application deadline, it's hard to maintain a conversation for that long. And so I would encourage you to do your internet research around that time to see what research is available online. You can look for publications by those different faculty members and read them. And so when you do start that conversation, you are very well informed about what it is that this university offers in terms of research. You're well informed in terms of what specific research there is available and what they're working on. And you're also, you have certain interests related to those research, so you can express your interests and how you might contribute to that research. And I have to tell you, so many professors are flattered by the fact that you have done your research and you have read their dissertation or you have found their publications. They're typically happy to hear that somebody out there in the world is following up and interested in their research. And so I think that's a good introduction to note that you're aware of them and the work that they do and how they contribute to the field.
And actually, that's one of the best ways to start researching what universities you want to go to, is by looking at who wrote the papers or the books that have been most influential to you. What professors are they? Where do they work? And that could potentially be a great fit university for you. You could work with that professor who you found very influential while you were doing your undergraduate research. All right. Any other questions? We'll wait like 15 more seconds for another question to come in, and then I guess if we don't hear from you guys, we'll go ahead and we'll wrap it up.
So, as I mentioned, I'm a graduate of our Master of Public Administration program, and I think I had a pretty successful application process. I think I engaged in the process well. So just to tell you a little bit about how I did that that made me feel successful. I actually visited the university prior to studying here. I reached out to a professor and I said, I'd like to visit your department and I'd like to sit in on a class, actually. And not every professor will be open to that, but this one happened to really like the idea. And so I was welcomed into a classroom and sat through a lecture. And then I had the opportunity to meet with the chair of the department and talk with them about their research and how my interests aligned. So I was very interested in international public administration, and I could tell that the department didn't have a lot of public administration, international work, but they were moving in that direction. And so that's kind of how I sold myself, is that I see that you're moving in this direction and I can be part of that. And I'm here to kind of help bring my interests and kind of help facilitate, the direction that you want to go. And so that relationship and really sharing how I was motivated to be part of that community, I think was in my favor. And actually, I was given a graduate assistantship to work directly with those faculty members too. And so there's another question. Is it better to connect by reaching out and citing the works of one or more than one professor in the department? I think it doesn't hurt to reach out to a couple different professors. You don't want to look insincere and say, my absolute favorite area of research is nanotechnology, and then say to another faculty member, my absolute most important area of research is circuit technology, something like that. So you don't want to contradict yourself, but it's fine to reach out to more than one faculty member. You may find, I mean, faculty come and go, they're on sabbatical, they're away for the summer. And so by reaching out to a couple different people, you are increasing your odds of getting a response.
Yeah, and if by any chance you're mentioning that when you reach out to one professor, should you cite multiple professors from the same department? I would say tread lightly there. Like any workplace, and especially universities, departments can be quite political. And if you start citing the work of a professor that maybe doesn't, you don't know what their relationships are to one another. You don't know anything about it. So it's a lot better to just stick with a one-to-one conversation. And then if you're interested in more than one professor, like Megan said, reaching them out to them individually rather than lumping them together in a group email or something like that, because that can get uncomfortable because you don't know what these folks' relationships are to one another.
Sure, and if you're reaching out to a group of professors, there's that kind of lack of one-to-one connection, but also there's kind of there's a name for this social situation where everybody else assumes that somebody else took care of it. And so if you reach out one-to-one and identify a person by name respectfully as doctor or professor, then you're more likely to hear back from somebody as well.
Yeah, the diffusion of responsibility,
There you
right?
go. Yeah, that's the one.
Great. No, that's good. That's like one of those common mistakes that you really want to sidestep.
Mm-hmm.
And the formality. Megan, that's a big one, the formality. Write formally. I mean, that nothing turns a professor who spends so much time writing formal documents over and over again, nothing turns them off quicker than a very informal, hi, Barb. Like, don't do that.
It's true. It's true. And check your language too, in terms of making sure it's a nicely put together email in proper English too. It's pretty easy for somebody to be quick to judge your English language skills in those first introductory emails. So do your best to make sure that they are solid. And keep in mind that somebody like me in an admissions office, while I don't make decisions, I do have a certain amount of influence. And so if you're talking very informally with me in a way that may not be appropriate, or if you're let's see, say being rude to a staff member, you can assume that that won't get back to a faculty member. And so, yeah, definitely be at your professional best when you're speaking with any representative of a university.
Okay, that opened up the door to some great conversation. We'll give it another 15 seconds to see if we get another great question through.
Jenica, have you had the warm weather up there that we've had in New York?
Yes, it was crazy. Yesterday it was like humid and 28 Celsius. That's right. I speak Celsius now.
I'm not
Yeah,
sure what that is,
you can
actually.
see the sun beating down on my face right now, actually.
I do, yeah. It's still sunny here too, which is wonderful.
Right. Before next week we plunge into the cold.
Hmm.
All right, well, that definitely used up the rest of our 15 seconds, and you guys got a weather update from up north, especially those of you down in Mexico and Peru. I'm sure you're enjoying, you'll be enjoying warmer weather much further off than us. So let's all thank Megan again for her time today and her expertise. And I'm going to just go ahead and put it back a slide since we've been off it for a while, just to remind you her email address. You can feel free to reach out to her as she said, she kindly offered to help with questions offline too, if you'd like, as well as I'm here to answer questions. And like I said, if you're not based out of Canada, please go to educationusa.state.gov, and that's where you can find your closest Education USA advisor. Thank you so much for your participation today, and this recording will be available most likely tomorrow or Friday, and I will email you all when it is up on the YouTube channel. Thank you.
All right, thank you all. I look forward to hearing from you, and best of luck.